Welcome back. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are tearing into a truly fascinating theory. We're looking at a deep dive analysis of a proposed coordinated master plan that's supposedly operating right behind the scenes of our economy. The overarching claim here that there's a structural blueprint currently in motion deliberately designed to stealthily devalue the US dollar. And the reason is to fund a massive, unprecedented technological boom. If this theory actually holds true, we are literally watching the largest financial sleight of hand of our generation. Let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to act as neutral investigators today, tearing down this theoretical machine gear by gear. We'll cover the master plan theory, the illusion of independence, controlling the data, stealth money printing, the oil and bond hurdles, and finally, 5 specific signs you need to watch. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the master plan theory, and the shift from wars to AI. So the source material presents this grand, sweeping theory about current global events. The premise is basically that there's a massive internal transition happening within the global profit-making structure. We're talking about a shift away from the military-industrial complex and toward a technological-industrial complex. The theory suggests that the old forever war model is actually being deliberately shut down, pointing to things like attempted US and Iran peace deals, all to create global stability. Why do that? Well, because you absolutely need a stable environment if you're going to build out a multi-trillion-dollar AI and data center grid. It's kind of like renovating a house, right? You have to put out the fire in the kitchen before you can start wiring the brand new smart home system in the living room. And crucially, central banks need a very specific set of conditions to stealthily devalue money to actually pay for it all. Moving right along to Section 2, the illusion of independence and the decoy strategy. Get a load of this rather surprising quote from Donald Trump. "I love inflation." Now, it sounds completely counterintuitive for any politician to say that out loud, right? But the source posits a really strategic angle here. As long as high inflation can be blamed on external stuff like foreign wars or high oil prices, it totally takes the heat off of domestic policy. This creates a fascinating dynamic for incoming Federal Reserve leadership, theoretically under someone like Kevin Warsh. By acting incredibly tough on this externally driven inflation right now, the Fed creates this powerful illusion of strict independence. They get to look fiercely hawkish today, which buys them the credibility they'll need to aggressively lower rates later, assuming those foreign conflicts eventually settle down. Which brings us to the first real gear of this machine in Section 3, controlling the data, or changing the gauges. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that whoever controls the data controls the policy. The source points out that the Fed is currently launching task forces to completely review how they measure the economy. Think about it. Right now, we have Story 1, the official lagging survey data, which says inflation is stubbornly high. That traps the Fed into keeping interest rates high. But if they can shift the narrative to Story 2, using new proprietary AI data from tech firms, they can suddenly point to their shiny new high-tech dashboard and officially declare that inflation is cratering in real time. And just like that, they have the perfect data-driven excuse to lower interest rates. Now, to protect this brand new narrative, the incoming Fed strategy theoretically involves dropping forward guidance, along with their internal projections, which you might know as the dot plot. By removing these established transparency tools, the central bank is essentially taking down the public scoreboards. Without those projections out in the open, it becomes incredibly difficult for the market, or any of us, to question the Fed's new data-driven decisions. They just get to operate inside a totally isolated black box. Let's look at gear number 2 in Section 4, stealth, money printing, and the banking loophole. Before we uncover this loophole, let's quickly define the end goal here, quantitative easing, or QE. In simple, everyday terms, this is the central bank firing up the money printers to buy government bonds and flood the economy with liquidity. But the master plan's biggest hurdle is figuring out how to print all this money to fund the AI boom without the whole world watching it pile up on the Fed's own balance sheet. And here's how they theoretically pull that off, using the commercial banking system as a proxy. Step 1. The Fed deregulates the banks by exempting government treasuries from a key rule called the supplemental leverage ratio, or SLR. Step 2. Because of that specific exemption, banks can now borrow money with massive amounts of leverage. Step 3. The banks take that highly leveraged money and scoop up the bonds the Fed is selling. And step 4 is the magic trick. The net effect is stealth quantitative easing. The money gets printed, sure, but it gets laundered right through the commercial banks, which actually allows the Fed to turn around and claim they're shrinking their balance sheet. I mean, this theoretical machine is incredibly elegant on paper, but it relies heavily on a massive wildcard. The trillion-dollar question is, Will the bond market actually play along? So, what happens if the machine jams? Let's dive into Section 5, the oil and bond hurdles. Right now, the bond market is basically rebelling by flattening the yield curve. This happens when short-term interest rates rise up closer to long-term rates, usually because investors expect high inflation to stick around. And this is a massive problem for the machine. You see, banks make their money on the gap between short and long-term rates. By driving short-term rates up, the bond market is essentially going on strike, doing the exact opposite of what the banks need to profitably execute that stealth loophole we just talked about. To really put the desperation behind this machine into perspective, consider this staggering number: $8 trillion. That is an 8 with 12 zeros behind it. That's the jaw-dropping amount of U.S. debt that has to be refinanced over the next year alone. And with foreign central banks buying fewer and fewer of our bonds since around 2014, the U.S. is quite literally running out of buyers. We desperately need the commercial banks to step in and buy this debt, which is exactly why the Fed needs that stealth loophole to function seamlessly. But the bond market isn't the only hurdle here. The source highlights what they call the oil X factor. Oil prices are basically the foundation of inflation. If conflict in the Middle East continues and shipping lanes stay blocked, oil prices are going to stay high. And without peace and flowing oil, the Fed never gets their shiny, data-driven excuse to lower rates. Without that excuse, the entire multi-trillion-dollar machine just grinds to a halt. Peace and flowing oil are literally required to turn the ignition on this whole plan. So, what does this all mean for you and your portfolio? Let's check our final section: 5 signs to watch. Let's look at the history books for a second. The data shows that when a new Fed chair takes over, the market almost always reacts. On average, a new chairman triggers a 12% drop in the market during their first 3 months. But when a true rule changer steps in, someone like Alan Greenspan, we've seen markets plummet over 30%. The takeaway here? Brace for turbulence. If this new, massive economic pivot really happens, investors should absolutely expect some significant short-term volatility. Knowing how to read the dashboard for yourself is absolutely vital. The source outlines 5 specific market signals you need to keep an eye on. You are watching for a weaker US dollar, higher stock prices, lower 10-year treasury yields, higher gold prices, and higher Bitcoin prices. Think of this as your cheat sheet. If these 5 metrics are moving up or down in the case of the dollar and yields, the stealth plan is actively working. If they flash the opposite, well, the gears are jammed. Which brings us to the absolute most important question of this entire explainer. Are we currently watching a necessary, albeit painful, economic evolution designed to fund the technological future of AI, or are we simply witnessing a highly coordinated, stealth devaluation of the US dollar just to mask completely unsustainable debt? I highly encourage you to keep a close eye on those 5 market signals and decide for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me to deconstruct this blueprint, and I will see you on the next explainer.